Welcome to Special Session. I'm Brian Schott. So glad to have you on board this week. This is the show where we break down the important Utah political news of the last week to help you understand the story and what it all means. And I think this week we're going to start on social media because a couple of Utah politicians had a very bad week. Let's start with Burgess Owens. On Friday, he reposted to his personal X/Twitter account an anti-Muslim video from an account that posts all sorts of really hateful white supremacist content. There's no other way to describe what this X/Twitter account was, and he reposted this video. The account's username was White Guilt is Dead, and the user had posted in the caption, "I love it when white people wake up about Islam and Muslims. They're the scum of the earth. White pride worldwide." And when you look at the video, I'm not going to play any of the audio from it, but it was pretty gross anti-Muslim content. It warned that Muslim men are coming to rape women in the United States and the UK, and made a number of inflammatory claims about the Muslim faith, saying that they, quote, hate women, children, white people, America, and Western civilization. And for some reason, Representative Burgess Owens retweeted that, reposted that to his X account. Now, when I reached out to his office, they didn't officially respond to me. They didn't respond to questions about why he might be interacting with that content. Does he follow that account online? I didn't get answers to those questions, but I did have a source close to Owens who said that it was probably a mistake, that he may have accidentally reposted it while he was scrolling, which, you know, makes some sense, but the post was online for more than 14 hours before I reached out about it. One of the reasons why you might not believe that explanation from Owens is that this is not the first time that he has interacted with that kind of content in the past. During his run for Congress in 2020 against Democrat Ben McAdams, he had multiple media appearances, did interviews with podcasts and YouTube channels that promoted the QAnon conspiracy theory, which believed that there was some secretive pedophile ring in Washington, D.C., and that Donald Trump was trying to expose them. Owens went on a number of those podcasts during the 2020 campaign. Back in 2016, Owens amplified an article from far-right conspiracy theorist Alex Jones that was a smear against Gold Star father Khizr Khan, who criticized Donald Trump at the Democratic National Convention. In this article, it claimed that Khan founded, quote, an academic periodical that sought to defend Sharia law to a legal system based on Western jurisprudence. It was this really gross anti-Muslim smear, and Owens promoted that in 2016. So this is not the first time that he has interacted with this stuff, which is why I found it so notable on Friday that he had reposted this content, this anti-Muslim video from a white supremacist account on Twitter. If you take the explanation from his team at face value, he made a mistake. He accidentally promoted this, but you have to wonder, why was this on his feed in the first place where he could accidentally repost it? I think that that's a question that deserves some answers, but I don't think that we're going to get them. The second story we have this week, somebody just needs to take Mike Lee's phone away from him, Senator Mike Lee. On Tuesday, he posted, then deleted, an apparent fake resignation letter from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. If Lee had taken 2 seconds to read this letter that had popped up online, to really take a look at it, all it would have taken is 2 seconds and you would have seen that it was a fake, that it was AI generated. All you had to do was look at the seal of the so-called Federal Reserve. The only English word in this seal that was posted to the letter was the word reserve. It also looks nothing like the Federal Reserve seal, but that didn't faze Lee. He just immediately posted it on his personal Based Mike Lee Twitter account with the red flashing light saying Powell's out. Lee later deleted it, and when a reporter asked him about it, he said it was because he couldn't verify whether it was authentic or not. which is something you probably should do before hitting the post button on your app. But apparently that's a little bit too much effort for Lee, because he's got to get those posts out there, got to get that engagement. Remember, taxpayers pay him $186,000 a year to constantly post on social media stuff like this. This is not the first time that Lee has been fooled by a fake post on social media. Almost 1 year to the day, the Jerome Powell fake letter was posted on July 22nd of this year. July 23rd of last year, 2024, Lee got fooled by a fake letter announcing the death of Jimmy Carter. And again, if he had just taken 2 seconds to look over the letter, he would have seen that it was fake, especially because a couple of paragraphs down, it had quotes from Carter making really gross sexual references to his late wife, Rosalind, and to former First Lady Nancy Reagan. All you have to do is take a second and read it before posting it. But that's not enough for Lee. He has to get it out there, post, get that engagement. And all of this is infuriating, especially to me, because Lee loves to criticize the media for any perceived inaccuracy. If a headline isn't written the way that he likes, he loves to go on social media and yell about how the media is inaccurate or they can't be trusted or they're biased. But there's seemingly zero accountability for him when he does stuff like this, when he posts these obviously fake things on social media. And he does it again and again and again, and he keeps getting fooled. And this isn't all. You remember he posted those really gross things online following the assassination of the Democratic lawmaker in Minnesota and her spouse, and the attempted assassination of another one. By the way, he still hasn't apologized for that. Again, no accountability for him at all. Also last July, he ran with this unsubstantiated rumor on social media that then President Biden was having some sort of quote unquote medical emergency on Air Force One. That never happened. That was a conspiracy theory that came from far-right conspiracy theorist Laura Loomer. But Lee, it tickled something in his lizard brain, and so he decided to run with it. Again, no accountability at all when he posts stuff like this. And I don't know about you, but I am tired. I've had it. I'm done with his constant criticism of the media, his attacks on the media, when he has demonstrated that he has zero media literacy himself. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But what it does is it riles up his base, it riles up the rubes, and so that's why he keeps doing it. Lee needs to shut up when it comes to the media. I don't want to hear anything from him again until he gets his own house in order. Once he stops posting fake stuff online, once he stops getting fooled by fake stuff online, then we can have a conversation about the media. But until then, I don't want to hear it. We learned this week that President Donald Trump was told by the Department of Justice in May, 2 months ago, that his name appears multiple times in the, quote, truckload of documents that the DOJ has about convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, which means that he and his administration have been lying about this information for months. They've been misleading the American people. They've been lying to the press about what they know about these documents. And now there's a fight in Congress, which I'm sure you're well aware of, to force the FBI, the DOJ, to turn over what they have, to release these documents. And we don't know if that's going to happen. But instead of coming down on the side of accountability, instead of coming down on the side of transparency from the government, especially when we find out this week that they've been lying about this issue, Senator Mike Lee voted this week to block a Democratic-led effort that would have pressured the DOJ to turn those documents over to Congress. It's kind of a Byzantine thing, but here's what happened. The Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday was debating a bill that targeted opioid trafficking. It was a bipartisan measure. They tried to get it in the last Congress. It didn't make it through. They're trying to push it through again. And Democratic Senator Cory Booker proposed an amendment to the bill that would have delayed its effective date, kept it from going into effect until the DOJ turned over what it had, the documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Essentially a pressure tactic to get the DOJ to turn this stuff over. In response, Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn proposed a different amendment, a substitute that nullified Booker's effort, made it null and void, wouldn't have gone into effect. And Lee joined the Republicans on the committee to vote for Cornyn's amendment, which would not have made a requirement to release the Epstein files, rather than Booker's amendment, which would have put some pressure on the DOJ. Republicans argued that what Booker was trying to do would have delayed this important piece of legislation. They didn't want to jeopardize this bipartisan piece of legislation by adopting Booker's measure. And Booker probably knew it wasn't going to get through anyway. But it was an attempt by Booker to get Republicans, to get members of Congress on the record. It was the first time they tried this in the Senate. There have been multiple efforts in the House. In fact, House Speaker Mike Johnson shut down the House of Representatives to avoid taking any votes on releasing the Epstein files. Didn't want to have any floor votes on that. But this was the first time it happened in the Senate, and Lee is now on record as voting against a measure to pressure the DOJ to release the Epstein files. There is an argument here that this is not 100% fair because it was attached to an unrelated bill, but still it was a vote about pressuring the administration. It was a vote against putting any pressure on the Trump administration to release information on Jeffrey Epstein. And you couple this with last week when all four members of Utah's House delegation voted against a Democratic effort on the floor to force the release of the Epstein files. So we've got Utah's congressional delegation, save one. Senator John Curtis hasn't been forced to take any votes yet, but Utah's congressional delegation voting against these efforts by Democrats to release the Epstein files. And in the case of Burgess Owens, that's interesting because he was going on these QAnon podcasts, although he didn't specifically talk about QAnon, but Representative Owens loves to talk about human trafficking. He made that a big part of his campaign in 2020, talked about it during his campaign, posted about it on social media. So you find that curious that he would not vote to pressure the release of these files on Jeffrey Epstein. And consider this, we talked about this on last week's show. Lee said that he wanted Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Jeffrey Epstein's closest associate. Don't forget, she ran an international criminal pedophile child sex trafficking ring. He wants her to testify before Congress. I don't know what that would accomplish because in 2021, when she was convicted of these crimes, the government said in court filings, quote, "The defendant's willingness to brazenly lie under oath about her conduct, including some of the conduct charged in the indictment, strongly suggests her true motive has been and remains to avoid being held accountable for her crimes." So I have no idea what having her testify would accomplish, especially because she has a history of not telling the truth when it comes to this. This whole issue is a mess, and as you can see, Trump and his allies are desperately trying to find a way out, and now we know that Senator Lee does not want to put any pressure on the Trump administration to release these files related to Jeffrey Epstein. This is a news item that probably would have slipped past you if you weren't paying attention. On Tuesday, the House Appropriations Committee added language to a spending bill that was setting funding for the Department of the Interior and the Environmental Protection Agency that holds funding for the Kennedy Center for the Arts in Washington, D.C. hostage unless they rename the Opera House, that's part of the complex, after First Lady Melania Trump. Now, Representative Celeste Malloy, who is on the Appropriations Committee, a very powerful committee in Congress, she voted yes on this amendment, on this language that was inserted into the bill by Republicans. I had to go back and watch the video of the hearing, scrolling through it and trying to find the moment when they held the roll call vote to confirm whether she was one of the 34 Republicans who voted in favor of the measure, and she was. And this just illustrates that a lot of the things that your elected representatives, especially in Washington, a lot of the things that they're doing just sort of sneak by unless you're really paying attention. Lucky for you, I'm that much of a junkie for political stuff. When this news item came out, when people started talking about it, I remembered that Representative Malloy is on the Appropriations Committee, so I decided to go back and check and see what she did, because she's probably not going to talk about this. She's probably not going to publicize it, but lucky for you, I am that sick in the head that that's something that I decided to spend a couple of hours trying to do. It also highlights how a lot of this stuff gets done instead of the normal legislative process. Instead of proposing legislation to rename the Opera House, they attach language to a funding bill and hold that funding hostage unless the Kennedy Center renames the Opera House after First Lady Melania Trump. They can't do that here in Utah. They can't do that in the Utah legislature because we have a rule that's single subject. A piece of legislation can only address one topic, one subject. You could not throw a measure like this into that bill because it would violate the one subject rule. But this is the same process that Representative Malloy used when she put a provision to sell off 500,000 acres of public lands in the massive tax cut and spending bill in Congress when it was going through the committees and the markups and they were talking about it. She proposed an amendment right at the last second of this meeting, right at the end of the meeting, to sell off these lands, and it got approved. Now, that measure was stripped out of the House version before they passed it, but it was resurrected in a much larger capacity by Senator Mike Lee. And as I've explained before, he tried to put it into the bill because this is something he's wanted to do for years, but he knows he cannot get it through the regular process. He would need 60 votes in the Senate to get this measure approved if he went through the regular process. He knows he doesn't have 60 votes. I don't even know if he has 50-some votes. That's why he had dropped it from this bill. But this bill only needed, because it was going through the reconciliation process, it only needed the slim majority, a bare majority, to pass. This measure renaming the Opera House at the Kennedy Center, it's really unclear whether or not this is going to pass the full House because this is not a reconciliation measure. This is regular legislation, and I don't know if it passes the House. And even if it does, it's really unlikely that it would make it into some bipartisan deal to pass the Senate because Republicans are going to need Democratic votes to pass whatever funding bills they have, and they only have until the end of September to do it. So this issue is not decided by any means. We still have a floor vote in the House, we still have it going through the Senate process, and then, as I said, it's going to need 60 votes in the Senate if this provision survives. It might not, we don't know, but its future is really uncertain right now. This is just a nice little illustration about how if you're not paying attention, and people are busy, they don't have time to pay attention. I do. And that's why you're here, I would think. But it just shows that if you're not paying attention or have someone who's paying attention for you, you might miss this stuff. It's looking more and more likely that Utah is going to increase the size of its congressional delegation after the 2030 census. We have another analysis that came out this week that says that Utah is one of a handful of states poised to gain another seat in the House of Representatives after the 2030 census. Last year, there was a report from the Brennan Center for Justice that looked at new census numbers and the trend lines and said Utah's population was growing enough, would increase enough by the time we got to 2030, if everything holds steady, if everything remains the same, if the trend lines continue in this direction, that the state would get another seat in Congress, going from 4 seats in the House of Representatives to 5. And now a new analysis that came out earlier this week says the same thing. The new report is from a Democratic-leaning group headed by former Attorney General Eric Holder. It's called the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And they also looked at the trend lines and said that Utah would be one of those states that would gain seats. According to their analysis, they think that Texas would gain 3 seats, Florida probably roughly 2. And then Utah, Arizona, Idaho, and Georgia would all gain 1 seat. And most of those states are Republican. Georgia's kind of swingy. The states that would be losing seats, according to this analysis, would be Democratic states. California would probably lose 3 seats. Illinois is projected to lose 2. And then you would see New York, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island each lose 1 of them. And according to this analysis, they said that it's not reason for Democrats to worry that seats will be shifting from traditionally blue states to red states, because they say that the population growth in these red states is happening in urban areas which are traditionally Democratic, and there's some evidence to back that up. What they're warning about, though, is if you see these Republican states gaining seats in Congress, then that could make the gerrymandering issue much more acute. Here in Utah, it's going to be really hard for Republicans to gerrymander 5 seats to favor the GOP. It's going to be really difficult to do that if the legislature retains power over redistricting, and I'm guessing they're going to do everything they can, even though there is an active court case, and I'll comment on that in a second. But in states like Texas, their gerrymandering would have to be really extreme to find ways to minimize Democratic gains. They're already trying to do it. They're going back into a special session right now to try and redistrict and gerrymander more Republican seats. They're hoping to pick up 4 or 5 Republican seats ahead of the 2026 midterms because of the headwinds that they're already facing electorally. So that's what this report is warning about. Gerrymandering in these Republican states could get much more extreme as Republicans try to find ways to maximize their advantage and break up the Democratic-leaning areas. Now, here in Utah, we're still waiting for the court decision, which could come at any day. I've spoken to numerous people who are connected to the court case that's currently winding its way through the system, alleging that the maps drawn by the legislature in 2021 were an illegal gerrymander, the congressional maps, and they were illegal because they violated Prop 4, which was passed by the voters in 2018, establishing an independent redistricting commission. You remember almost a year ago now, actually over a year ago, the Utah Supreme Court ruled that lawmakers overstepped their bounds when they passed legislation to gut that citizen-approved initiative. And we're just waiting now for the lower court to decide, to rule on whether or not the legislature violated the principles of Prop 4 when they drew those maps. It's likely that they did. And that's probably the ruling or something in that neighborhood that we're going to see when we finally get that opinion, when it's finally released. But that doesn't mean that we're going to see new maps drawn ahead of the 2026 midterms here in Utah. There's a lot of people who are expecting to force the legislature back into session to redraw those maps. We're running against the calendar. The clock is ticking, and we're running out of time to do that. If you remember, the Lieutenant Governor's office has argued that if there are new maps drawn, they need to be done by sometime in November so they can get their systems in place and so candidates know where they're running. It most definitely has to be done by January 2nd, 2026, because that's the day that candidate filing starts and candidates need to know where they are running. Those are the first 2 deadlines we're running up against, but also consider that no matter what the judge rules, there will likely be an appeal, which will slow down this whole process even further. And it's just my sense, my gut feeling. I'm not a lawyer again, but I like to play one on a podcast. But it's just my gut feeling that we're probably not going to have new maps drawn before 2026, or it's going to be extremely unlikely that the legislature will be forced to draw new maps before the 2026 midterms. 2028 is probably the more likely scenario if this court case goes the way that I expect it to. But we'll only have to deal with 4 seats for 2 election cycles then, because we're on track right now to get number 5. And as I said before, it's going to be really hard for Republicans to gerrymander the state to make 5 GOP-dominated seats. With 4, it's a little bit easier. As we saw in 2021, they maximized the Republican vote, almost evenly divided all the Democratic voters in four to protect the Republican incumbency. And even if we do get new maps for the 4 seats, you're not going to miraculously see a Democratic leaning map come out of that. You will see a map that might be more competitive, where instead of having a plus 11, plus 15 advantage, you might see a Republican candidate or a district lean plus 5, plus 3, somewhere in there, which is much more competitive than the seats we have right now, where all of the Republicans have double-digit advantages in the electorates. I would expect that whatever maps they draw for a 5th seat in Congress, that would probably be much more competitive, or at least one of those districts would most likely have to be much more competitive than what we have right now here in the state. That's going to do it for this week. I don't know about you, but I've probably had enough talking about the news. It's time to go out and enjoy the weekend. Before we go, I'd like to ask you to do me a favor. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast if you haven't already, wherever you can. What that does is it helps new people find the show, and just that's how the algorithm works. The more people who engage with this content, with this show, then that makes the algorithm suggest it to more people, and we can get more listeners, and then I can work to help educate them on how Utah politics really works. So I would appreciate that. Also, if you like this content, I'd like to ask you to go to my website, utahpoliticalwatch.news. You can sign up for my newsletter for free, or if you really like what I do, you can become a paying subscriber and help support this journalism, or you can leave a one-time donation. I'll leave the tip jar in the show notes. You can drop me a couple of bucks and help me create more podcasts like this, more journalism. As an independent journalist, I rely on my listeners, my subscribers, people who leave donations to help me continue this work, and essentially they're my boss, so I would appreciate that. If you feel like you want to drop me a couple of bucks and show some appreciation for this show, to help me continue what I'm doing, I'll leave the link in the show notes for the tip jar, or where you can go subscribe to my newsletter. If you do decide to become a paying subscriber at the website, it's just $5 a month. That'll get you some extra stuff. You'll get some subscriber-only newsletters. Every morning I put out the morning news brief, which has exclusive analysis about things that are happening in politics, my thoughts for the morning. I write something every single day, and you also get a curated news roundup of the top Utah and national and international political headlines, so you can get up to speed before you head out the door in the morning. You also get the privilege of commenting on articles. Only paid subscribers get to comment on things that I post on utahpoliticalwatch.news, and you'll also get access to our Discord, where we talk about Utah politics. And if you decide you want to become a sustaining member for $10 a month, I'll send you some exclusive Utah Political Watch laptop stickers as a special thank you for supporting my work. All of that for $5 a month, less than a cup of coffee if you drink coffee, less than a swig soda. What a bargain, and I would appreciate it. We'll be back with another episode next week. I want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Brian Schott, and we'll talk to you soon.